our first assignment was actually about a week of uh, refreshing courses and training courses on mines and booby traps that we took right there in Chulai, and then they loaded us on trucks and moved us down south of Chulai to Duck Pho, and we landed on a base camp in Duck Pho, and they divided us up, and our first assignment was bridge security, and they sent us parts of the platoons to several different bridges, and that's what we did the first week or so on the bridges. We thought we were in good shape when we went to when we got through with our training in Fort Hood. We thought we were just about as good a shape as we could get, because all we did was run up and down the hills in Fort Hood, and I carried a 90 miller recoilless rifle, which was heavy, and so I thought, well, you can't get in much better shape than I'm in. But when we got to Vietnam and we didn't get any sleep, all of a sudden we're carrying live ammunition, we're carrying food on us and everything, and the weight that we carried would vary from 75 to 100 pounds depending on what all you had to take and how much food you had to take, depending on how long your mission was or how much ammunition you wanted to carry. And I remember about probably the end of the first week, I thought I would die from exhaustion. I literally felt like my system couldn't handle anymore. But then all of a sudden one day I woke up, and after a couple hours sleep, and I actually felt pretty good, and that's when I knew that I was going to probably make it if somebody didn't shoot me. One time we went 3.5 days without eating, simply because it was we were up in some mountains or down in some valleys, and the monsoons had set in, and the fog was heavy, and you couldn't see the mountaintops, so the helicopters couldn't get in to resupply us. We went about 3.5 days without eating, and whenever you weigh 150 pounds and you're carrying 100 pounds of weight on you and you're not eating anything, there's not much for your body to work on. And we were desperate, and we were looking for animals to kill, and nothing was there, no birds, no anything. And we finally crawled on top, climbed up a mountain and got on top of it where the helicopters could find us, and they brought a hot meal out to us. And we thought that we would be able to eat 2 or 3 steaks, and everybody was complaining because they gave us a little bitty piece of steak and 1 spoonful of English peas and 1 spoonful of mashed potatoes with gravy, and we were all hollering at them, you know, we're starving. And they told us, if you can eat all that, you can have more, all you want, but eat that first. And hardly anybody could finish that plate because our stomachs had shrunk up so much. It's a miserable feeling. Our leadership in A Company was some of the best, I believe, that existed in Vietnam. We had a captain that was tough. He was a good guy. He was fair. He believed in men being in shape. He had a purpose. He somehow managed to keep our morale up better than any company over there. And what he did before we left is he rounded out his company with the best possible cadre he could find, and he went around Fort Hood locating people that he had heard about or that he had read about or whatever that had already been to Vietnam and was willing to go back. So he sent us back with platoon sergeants and some squad leaders that had experience in combat, and so I believe that we had one of the best managed and best commanded companies in Vietnam, and Captain Brennan named our company the Gunfighters before we ever left Fort Hood, and we actually earned a pretty good reputation in Vietnam. Sergeant Bartley was one of the best leaders, non-commissioned officer leaders that we had. He was a Sergeant E5 when we left Fort Hood, but he had come to us from the 1st Cav, where he had just spent a year in Vietnam and he had been wounded and so forth. And so then he decided he'd go back with us, and he had met Captain Brennan somewhere, And Captain Brennan decided to ask him to come back with us, and he accepted. And he was probably the ultimate soldier. He looked like a soldier. He acted like a soldier. He wasn't particularly what you'd call gung-ho. It's just his job and his mission was to kill the enemy. And he did it very methodically, and he did it very businesslike. He didn't believe in molesting bodies once they were dead. He didn't believe in harassing unnecessarily the people. He believed that if they were enemy and you knew they were enemy, kill your enemy and leave him alone. Get his belongings for intelligence purpose and leave the body. He was so in tune with being in a war zone or being in the woods or in the jungle. I always tell people he's the only man I ever knew that went through the monsoons and never got wet. And he was just a unique person. And Sergeant Bartley, had he not been there with us, I believe we would have lost a lot more men. He and Sergeant Burks were extraordinarily good and just great leaders. When we first got to Vietnam, like I said, we went on bridge security, and we had our first little fight there on the bridges. They attacked us at night. One night they came through the water and started shooting at us. And that was the 7th night we were in Vietnam. And that night my squad leader got killed. And of course that put the fear in us. That's when we realized that we were truly in a war zone. And I think every one of us, without doubt, probably were thinking to themselves, I want to go home now. And it was a shock to lose one of our guys. And I thought it was pretty pathetic that it had to be my squad leader. And on the 7th day we were there. And we really didn't get into a lot of heavy firefights the first couple of months we were there. We got sniped at a lot. A couple of times we got pinned down by several snipers, and that's scary because you don't know where it's coming from. I remember one particular sniper had me and Martinez down in this rice paddy, and he kept shooting at us, and we could hear his weapon operating, but we couldn't find him. He was in the sugar cane, and he kept shooting, and he would miss us by a foot or two. And finally we just started laughing. Every time he'd fire, he'd miss us a little bit. And it dawned on me, we must be hysterical. We're laying out here with some fool shooting at us, and we're laying here laughing. And so I told Martinez, I said, man, let's get out of here. So we jumped up and ran. But we didn't get into a lot of firefights. It started increasing and elevating as we got closer to the Tet Offensive. We had come in out of the field off of a fairly long 3 or 4 week operation out in the jungle, and we thought we were going to get 2 or 3 days stand down to be able to shower and clean up and clean weapons and just lay around, play cards and relax and eat hot food and just have a pretty good time. And we had, I'd gotten a shower, and a bunch of guys had gotten a shower, and I went and got clean clothes before I did anything else. But about half the company hadn't made it to the showers yet, and all of a sudden the word came down that we were fixing to leave again, that everybody had to go get fresh ammo and get ready, get their field gear ready to go. And we had like 45 minutes to an hour to get everything together to meet on the helipad for departure to areas unknown to us. So we went down to the helipad, and we sat down there about, seemed like several hours. And I remember when we were sitting, you know, when you're sitting on the helipad waiting for the chopper to come in to pick you up, you get pretty bored. And I remember Turner was sitting there, Philip Turner. He was my machine gunner, and he had a green, one of those locust-type grasshoppers on his fatigues. And he said, I'm going to give this thing 10 seconds to get off of my leg, or I'm going to eat him. And we all started counting down. So when he hit 0, he just picked him up and put him in his mouth and started crunching and munching. And then he opened his mouth and showed us all what a chewed up grasshopper looked like. And it was pretty gross. So finally the chopper got there. They loaded the whole company up on a Chinook. And we still didn't know where we were going. We just knew we were going north. And there were so many things going on at that time that any place we went was probably going to be bad. The rumor got out that we were going to Quezon to help relieve the Marines up there. They had been under siege for several, like a couple of months already, and they were taking a beating. So we went on the Chinook, and it seemed like we flew for hours and hours, and I'm sure it was a couple of hours. And we landed in Da Nang, south of Da Nang, at an old Marine base camp. And so they told us to go ahead and set up for the evening. It was just before dark. Okay, we left this old Marine base camp and we started walking down this railroad track. And it was kind of a high berm, and the track itself had been torn out, but you could still tell that it was a railroad track. Someone opened up on us with a 50 caliber machine gun. And Sergeant Burks asked for a green star cluster flare to fire to show that we were friendly forces. But somebody handed him a red one, and he fired that, and that marks an enemy position. So, boy, they really opened up on us then. And luckily, the berm was high enough to where they didn't kill anybody or hit anybody. And finally, we were able to get through on a radio to someone who put a stop to the firing. And so we were able to go on from there to this, close to this old graveyard where we spent the remainder of the night. It must have been about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Normally, we would dig a foxhole and take precautionary measures, but everybody was so exhausted, and we knew we were only going to have a few hours to sleep. Everybody just kind of laid out in defensive positions and slept on the top of the ground, and got our 2 or 3 hours sleep, and then it gradually became daylight. When we woke up, that was the morning of February the 8th. We started almost immediately at daylight. We started receiving a round over our head. A sniper would pop around a good ways over our head. You can kind of tell the way it breaks air, whether it's close to you or not. And we would get one every 10 minutes or so, one round. And then after about 30 minutes, we'd start getting a couple of rounds. And they were pretty high. And then it got a little heavier. We would start getting one just every couple of minutes, and then 2 or 3 every couple of minutes. And at one point, Captain Brennan made this statement. He said, if we get one more round, he said, we're getting online and we're going over to that village, which was Lojeng. So we got that other round that Captain Brennan had said that if we get another round, we're going to go online and go kill or capture some snipers. So he put the second platoon on the left of the line, third platoon, which is my platoon, on the right. The first platoon stayed back in a tree line to offer us covering fire if anything happened, and the mortar platoon was behind them. So we started moving out on line, the 2 platoons, toward a village called Lojeng, named Lojeng. And there was about a 400 to 600 meter wide rice paddy that we had to go through to get to that village. And I remember when we first took off from that graveyard night logger position, there was a cobra that had ran out in front of Captain Brennan and some of us on the right side. And I mean, he was boogieing. He was really going. And I remember Captain Brennan and Sergeant Burks tried to shoot at him, and I don't know if they hit him. I'm sure they didn't, because he it just accelerated that much more, and he got out. I don't know what happened to the snake. So we stayed on line, and we got out about 100 yards, and I noticed that the sniping had really gotten a lot heavier, and it got to the point where it was more than sniping. And it started getting pretty intense. And after we had gone out about maybe 200 yards, it really got bad. So Captain Brennan, maybe we were out about 300 or 400 yards, and Captain Brennan told us all to get down behind this rice dike. Well, my squad leader had gone out in front of us, and we got down, and Captain Brennan was calling for airstrikes or calling for support and trying to figure out what was going on, because no one had told us that there was a North Vietnamese battalion in front of us. They knew it, but no one had given us a word. So he's trying to figure out what was going on, and he requested helicopter support. And he popped a green smoke grenade and threw it behind him to mark our position so they wouldn't strafe us or hit us. And when he did that, the North Vietnamese put the smoke grenade out with a mortar. They dropped a mortar right on top of the smoke. And Lieutenant Swank was there with Captain Brennan. Lieutenant Swank was the artillery FO, and he started trying to get a fire mission coming from the artillery. And about that time, the firing had intensified to the point where we it was unbelievable. And all of a sudden, I realized that they had machine guns set up on the corners of the rice paddy, and the firing was just above the tops of the rice dikes. And so we were all down behind the rice dikes, and my squad leader had just gone down like he had been hit. Well, he was out about 10 yards in front of the rice dike. And so I thought he had been shot, so I told somebody to go get him, because I was the A-team leader. And everybody just looked at me, because we were all kind of in shock. So the medic and I got up and went out and picked him up. But just before we picked him up, we tried to find a wound, and we couldn't find a wound on him anywhere. So we picked him up and brought him back behind the rice dike. Well, when we bent over to pick him up, all of a sudden the medic, a bullet came between his lips and clipped the left front tooth out of his mouth. And I remember he hollered, and he had this shock, this look, this total surprise on his face. And he said, "Oh man, they just shot my tooth out." And I remember looking at him thinking, man, this is getting serious. And so we dropped the sergeant behind the rice dike, and we were working on him when Captain Brennan told us to pull back. And the firing had gotten so intense, it was just breaking rice straws off in front of our faces, and you could hear the bullets pop in the air all around you. I felt bullets hitting my clothes and hitting my pack and the web gear on my pack. And so Captain Brennan told us to pull back, and I told him that we couldn't pull back, that we had wounded men out there that we had to attend to. And I didn't know it at the time, but he was wounded, and that was the reason. Well, and he had seen something I hadn't seen, and that he knew that there was probably 1,000 troops headed toward us. They had come up out of a trench and attacked us, and I was busy working on this wounded man, and hadn't seen that yet. But I could tell by the firing that it was so bad. I remember that Captain Brennan, whom we all highly respected, had told us again, you got to pull back. And I still didn't know that he was wounded. And then about that time, his RTO was hit. And I remember him screaming so bad, and just it drove me crazy. I mean, he was hurting, and he was scared, and he knew Captain Brennan was having to pull back. And he thought Captain Brennan was going to leave him out there, and I remember him begging him not to leave him. And, we were working on my squad leader to get him back to the rear. And so we decided, rather than stay there, at first I was going to stay there, we were going to stay there, me and my squad, with this wounded man, and just fight it out right there and die if we must. But when I realized that it was far more serious than I first thought, and I started hearing other people scream as they were getting hit and either dying or just being wounded, I decided we needed to pull this man back to the graveyard that we had spent the night at the night before. So myself and Smize, Sheridan, the medic, and Polino started pulling him back, and we were in heavy, sloppy mud, and everybody had all their equipment on, and It was almost impossible to pull him through the mud, but we were doing that, and at some point, I remember the whole world just kind of going red, and I felt this searing pain in the front of my head, and I remember just going out, and I realized I'd just gotten hit, and a bullet had gone through the front of my helmet and whacked me on the head right in the middle of my forehead pretty hard and knocked me out. And well, it didn't knock me out at first, but about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes after I got hit, I was just rolling around out there bleeding. A mortar hit close to me, and it kind of flipped me around, and all of a sudden I couldn't see anything. And I put my hand up on the corner of my head. I had a real bad pain up here, and all I could feel was goo coming out of my head, and I couldn't see anything out of my right eye, and I thought the corner of my head was missing. And when I thought that, I started letting the whole world know I'd been hit like some of the other guys were doing. And after a few minutes of that, my eyes started clearing up, and I kept putting my hand back up here, and all it was the mortar had blown mud into my eye, and I had mud all over my face, and the bleeding mixed with the mud just felt like my brain's hanging out. And so I remember I was getting sick because I'd lost so much blood and had a tremendous concussion. And I don't remember a whole lot about what I did other than I kept crawling around out there and without any direction. And I remember 3 guys. There was a black guy named Holloway, a guy named Johnson, and I believe Avant had crawled out there to put a bandage on my head and to get me turned around back to the right direction, going back to the rear.